In a quaint, unassuming town nestled in the heart of rural Washington, there lived a man named Larry. Larry was known for his meticulous lawn, a stark contrast to the untamed wilderness that surrounded the small community. He took pride in the neat rows of tulips that lined the sidewalk leading up to his modest home, each one standing tall and proud, a vibrant spectrum of color that seemed to mock the dreary overcast that so often loomed above. His neighbors, while they appreciated the sight, often wondered where he found the time and patience to maintain such orderliness amidst the chaos of life. Little did they know, Larry's meticulousness was not just a hobby, it was a defense mechanism, a way to keep the darkness at bay. Every morning, Larry could be seen at the crack of dawn, his breath misting in the cool air as he pushed his lawnmower in perfect, straight lines. His routine was almost ceremonial in nature, as if by taming the grass he could somehow control the unseen forces that whispered to him at night. His eyes darted frequently to the edges of his property, where the tall, unruly trees leaned in, seemingly eager to reclaim the space he had so fiercely stolen from them. The leaves rustled with a sinister intent that only Larry heard, sending shivers down his spine even in the warm embrace of the sun. He worked swiftly, his hands calloused from years of wielding gardening tools and his back bent with the weight of his burdens. Summary 1. Larry is a man known for his immaculate lawn in a rural Washington town. His neighbors are unaware that his rigorous gardening routine is a defense against the malevolent whispers from the surrounding wilderness that haunt him at night. His property borders ominous, overgrown trees, whose rustling leaves seem to harbor malicious intent, which he alone can perceive. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the shadows grew shorter and Larry's breathing grew easier. The whispers from the forest grew fainter as the day's activities took hold of the town. He would often pause, his hand hovering over a freshly trimmed bush, listening intently. But all he could discern was the distant chirping of birds and the occasional car passing by. Still, the feeling of being watched never truly left him, a constant reminder that he was living on borrowed time. The day's work done, Larry retreated into his house, the walls thick and solid against the world outside. He liked the familiar creaks of the floorboards and the hum of his old refrigerator. They were comforting, almost soothing, compared to the eerie silence of the woods that lay just beyond his fence. He sat in his favorite chair, the worn fabric hugging his body like a warm blanket, and stared at the TV without really watching it. The news droned on, but all he could think about was the looming presence in the trees, the way they seemed to stretch closer to his home with each passing day. One evening, as Larry was preparing dinner, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across his walls. He paused, his knife hovering over the potatoes, his heart racing. It had been months since he had first heard the whispers, and while they had become a constant companion, he had never experienced anything so physical before. He took a deep breath, trying to convince himself that it was just a coincidental power outage. But when the lights dimmed again, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from the very walls of his home, the floorboards themselves speaking in a language he didn't quite understand but filled him with dread. The following day, Larry noticed something strange happening to his garden. The tulips, once a bastion of order and beauty, had started to wilt. Their vibrant petals curled inward, revealing rotten centers that stank of decay. He tried to ignore it, attributing it to a pest or a sudden change in the weather, but deep down he knew it was more than that. It was as if the very essence of the forest was seeping into his sanctuary, corrupting the one thing that brought him solace. Determined to fight back, Larry decided to investigate the source of the whispers. He waited until nightfall, the time when the town grew quiet and the shadows grew long. Armed with a flashlight and a shovel, he approached the tree line, his heart pounding in his chest. The whispers grew to a cacophony, a symphony of malicious intent that seemed to beckon him closer. With trembling hands, he parted the branches and stepped into the embrace of the woods. The underbrush was thick, the trees looming above like ancient sentinels, their twisted limbs reaching out to snatch at him. The ground beneath his feet squelched with every step, as if the earth itself was trying to swallow him whole. He shone the flashlight into the darkness, but the beam seemed to only highlight the menacing shapes that flitted at the periphery of his vision. Larry knew he should turn back, that he was venturing into a realm that didn't belong to him, but something curiosity, fear, or perhaps a hint of madness pushed him forward. The whispers grew clearer as he delved deeper into the forest, morphing into a chorus of hissing and cackling. He stumbled upon a small clearing, the center of which was dominated by a towering tree, unlike any he had ever seen before. Its trunk was twisted and gnarled, as if it had been born of the very essence of the nightmare that gripped his soul. The whispers grew louder still, and he could feel a malevolent presence coiling around the tree, pulsing with a dark energy that made his skin crawl. Suddenly a hand, cold and clammy, clamped down on his shoulder. He spun around, his heart in his throat, only to find that he was still alone. Or so he thought. The light from his flashlight revealed a series of handprints on the tree, each one slightly different in size and shape, but all with the same disturbing feature: the skin looked decayed, and the fingers ended in jagged stumps. It was as if the very forest was reaching out to claim him, to pull him into its decaying embrace. Panic set in, and Larry broke into a run, stumbling over roots and through thorny bushes. The whispers grew to a fever pitch, seemingly all around him now. He could feel the forest closing in, the branches snapping and twisting in a frenzy as if the trees were alive and angry. His lungs burned, and his heart felt like it was about to explode from his chest. He had to get out, to escape the relentless pursuit of whatever was lurking in the shadows. Emerging from the woods, gasping for air, he saw his house in the distance, a beacon of safety. As he sprinted towards it, the whispers grew fainter, the shadows less oppressive. But just as he reached the fence, a final, piercing scream echoed in his ears. He looked back, but the forest was still and silent once more. The handprints on his shoulder burned with an icy fire, a grim reminder of the horrors he had left behind. In the days that followed, Larry's lawn grew wild and unkempt. The whispers in the night grew more intense, and the handprints on the tree began to spread, reaching towards his house like the tendrils of a creeping vine. His neighbors talked in hushed tones, wondering what had happened to the meticulous man who had once brought such order to their street. But Larry knew better. He knew that the darkness had found a way in, and now it was just biding its time. Each night as he lay in bed, the whispers grew louder, turning into taunts and threats. He could almost make out words, but they remained just out of his grasp, a twisted language that played with his sanity. He tried to keep the curtains closed tight, but the shadows grew more persistent, stretching out from the corners of his room like long, spindly fingers. His sleep was plagued with nightmares of the decaying hands, groping for him from the inky blackness beyond. One morning, Larry found a bouquet of withered tulips on his doorstep, their once beautiful heads now a grotesque mass of blackened mush. The note attached read, "Your time is almost up." It was written in a script that seemed to shift and slide before his eyes, the ink a sickly green that smelled of mold and decay. He knew he had to act, to somehow break the hold that the forest had on him before it was too late. He gathered what weapons he could: a chainsaw, a can of gasoline, and a box of matches. His plan was simple. Desperate, he would cut down the tree that bore the handprints and burn the forest's influence away. The townsfolk watched from a safe distance as he marched back into the woods, their eyes filled with a mix of pity and fear. They had seen this before, the slow descent into madness that the whispers brought. But Larry was determined to fight, to save his home, his sanity, and perhaps even his soul. The chainsaw roared to life, its vibrations echoing through the once silent woods. The tree trembled, the whispers rising in a furious crescendo. As the blade bit into the ancient bark, the handprints began to pulse with a sickly light, the whispers turning to screams of rage. Larry felt the darkness push back, the pressure in his head growing unbearable. He gritted his teeth and pushed on, each cut sending splinters flying into the air like shrapnel. The screams grew louder, more frantic, until finally, with one last mighty heave, the tree toppled. The forest fell silent, the whispers retreating to the shadows from which they came. Larry stood over the fallen giant, his heart pounding in his chest, the taste of victory sweet in his mouth. But as he turned to leave, a low, guttural growl rose up from the earth, shaking the ground beneath his feet. He looked back to see the tree's roots, writhing and twisting like the legs of a giant, angry insect. The whispers grew into a cacophony, and the forest itself seemed to rise up, the trees bending and stretching in a macabre dance of fury. He knew he had angered something ancient and powerful, something that had been slumbering in the woods for eons, waiting for the right moment to strike. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, and the once familiar trees now loomed over him like the bones of a giant beast. Larry realized that he had merely scratched the surface of the horror that lay hidden in the heart of the woods, and now, It had been awakened. With the gasoline sloshing in the can, he soaked the tree and the surrounding earth, the whispers now a chorus of pleas and curses. He lit the match, the flame flickering in the breeze. For a moment he hesitated, his hand trembling. Was he about to destroy the very fabric of the world as he knew it? But the whispers grew more fervent, and the malevolent presence grew stronger, so he tossed the match. The fire erupted with a fierce roar, the flames licking the sky, setting the night alight with an orange glow. The forest shuddered as if in pain, the trees groaning and the ground shaking beneath Larry's feet. The whispers grew to a crescendo, and then, just as suddenly as they had started, they ceased. The fire raged on, consuming the tree and the decay that had taken root in the clearing. Larry watched, transfixed, as the flames danced and the shadows played out a grisly ballet of death and rebirth. He felt a strange mix of relief and dread, as if he had just slain a beast that had stalked him since childhood. But as the fire began to die down, the whispers returned, faint at first, but growing stronger. They were no longer confined to the tree, but seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. The handprints on the surrounding trees began to pulse with the same sickly light, spreading like a disease through the veins of the forest. Larry realized his mistake. He had not defeated the darkness, he had only angered it further. The ground beneath his feet grew warm, then hot, and he felt the first tendrils of panic coil around his heart. He turned to run, but the earth began to split open, revealing a yawning chasm of blackness. The whispers grew into a roar, and from the abyss emerged a figure, tall and twisted, a parody of human form. It reached for him with arms made of tangled branches and leaves, the handprints now glowing eyes that bore into his soul. Larry screamed, dropping his weapons and stumbling back, his heart racing in his chest like a caged animal. The figure stepped closer, the ground trembling with each step, the whispers now a deafening scream that filled his ears. He knew he had no escape. The forest had claimed him, and there was no going back. The last thing he saw was the twisted smile of the creature, a grin of victory, before the darkness closed in and the whispers swallowed him whole. The town awoke the next day to find Larry's house empty, the lawn overgrown and wild. The whispers had stopped, the forest seemingly calm once more. But the handprints remained, a silent testament to the horror that had transpired. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones, sharing their own whispers of the man who had dared to challenge the wilderness. Some said he had been taken, others that he had gone mad and run off into the woods. Only a few knew the truth, those who had heard the screams that pierced the night, the final, desperate cries of a man who had tried to fight the unyielding embrace of the darkness that lay just beyond their doorsteps. As the days passed, the handprints grew, spreading from tree to tree, the forest slowly reclaiming the land it had once called home. The lawn grew thick with weeds, the tulips now a distant memory of the order that had once reigned. The house stood sentinel over the decay, a silent witness to the battle that had been fought and lost. One by one, the neighbors began to hear the whispers, faint echoes of Larry's fate. They grew restless, their sleep plagued by nightmares of decaying hands reaching for them from the shadows. The townsfolk grew more insular, fearful of what lurked just outside their windows. They avoided the edge of the woods, the once peaceful boundary now a stark reminder of the chaos that lay in wait. And then, one morning, the handprints appeared on the doors of their own homes, a grim reminder that no one was safe from the forest's reach. The townsfolk gathered in the town square, their eyes wide with terror. They spoke of moving, of leaving the cursed town behind and starting anew. But deep down, they all knew that the darkness was not confined to this one place. It was a part of the world, a part of themselves, and no matter how far they ran, it would always find them. The whispers grew stronger, a constant murmur that hummed beneath the veneer of their lives. The townsfolk tried to ignore it, to carry on as best they could. But the handprints grew, the decay spread, and soon the whispers were all they could hear. They became paranoid, turning on one another, accusing each other of inviting the darkness into their lives. The town that had once been a bastion of peace and tranquility descended into a frenzy of fear and suspicion. As the shadows grew longer, so too did the tendrils of the whispers, stretching out to ensnare the very fabric of their existence. The townsfolk were consumed by the madness, their minds warped by the constant barrage of malicious whispers. They tore down the fences that had once kept the forest at bay, inviting the decay into their very hearts. And as the handprints grew over every inch of the town, the whispers grew to a crescendo, the darkness consuming all in a final, terrifying embrace. The town was never the same. The whispers remained, a constant reminder of the price of their curiosity. The forest grew bolder, its reach extending further with each passing day. The handprints remained, a grim warning to all who dared to tread too close to the edge of the wild. And somewhere in the heart of the woods, the ancient creature that Larry had unwittingly awakened watched and waited, biding its time, for the day when it would claim the land once more, and the whispers would become the only sound in the endless night. The townsfolk avoided the forest, speaking in hushed tones of the madness that had claimed Larry and the fate that awaited anyone foolish enough to challenge the natural order. They tried to rebuild, to restore the semblance of normalcy, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seeped into their dreams, planting seeds of doubt and despair. Relationships crumbled, friendships turned sour, and families were torn apart by the ever-present specter of fear. One by one, the town's inhabitants began to succumb to the whispers. They started hearing their own names in the rustling of the leaves, the voices of lost loved ones in the creaking of the branches. The handprints grew more defined, the decay spreading through the very structures of their homes. The walls whispered of the futility of their struggle. The floors groaned with the weight of their despair. Some tried to leave, to escape the clutches of the forest, but the whispers followed them, a relentless pursuit that could not be outrun. In the end, the town was abandoned, a ghostly reminder of the folly of mankind. The handprints remained, a testament to the power of the unseen. The forest grew wild, the whispers now a part of its very essence. The buildings stood as silent sentinels to the horror that had once been a quaint rural community, the handprints etched into their very foundations. The whispers grew stronger, reaching out to those who dared to venture too close, beckoning them into the embrace of the darkness. And the creature, now fully awakened, reveled in the chaos it had sown. The whispers grew to a crescendo, a siren's call to those who would listen, inviting them to become one with the forest's decay. The once beautiful tulips grew twisted and black, their petals a macabre reflection of the twisted hearts of the townsfolk. The whispers grew clearer, more seductive, and soon, others began to hear them, drawn in by the promise of power, of becoming more than they ever thought possible. The cycle of fear and madness continued, as the forest waited, ever patient, for its next victim to emerge from the shadows of doubt and despair. Years passed, and the town was forgotten, swallowed by the relentless march of the whispers and the decay they brought. The handprints grew more numerous until they covered every building, every tree, a reminder of the fate that awaited all who dared to challenge the forest's dominion. The whispers grew stronger, a cacophony of voices that seemed to whisper of ancient secrets and unspeakable truths. Those who ventured too close to the edge of the woods reported seeing figures moving within, twisted shapes that danced just beyond the edge of their vision. A new generation grew up on the stories of the town's tragic end, whispered around campfires and in the quiet moments before sleep. They spoke of Larry's folly, of the darkness that had claimed him, and of the whispers that lingered on the edge of the forest, waiting for the next to hear their siren song. Some believed the stories to be mere legend, cautionary tales to keep children from straying too far. But those who had felt the hand of the creature, who had seen the shadows that flitted just beyond the edge of the firelight, knew better. The whispers grew more cunning, more insidious. They spoke of the beauty of decay, the power of chaos, and the freedom of letting go. The children of the neighboring towns grew restless, their dreams haunted by the whispers of the forest. Some, unable to resist the call, disappeared into the woods, never to be seen again. Their parents mourned, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that their children had become part of the very darkness they had feared. The forest grew, the whispers spread, and the handprints remained, a grim promise of the fate that awaited any who would dare to enter the realm of the damned. A group of teenagers, emboldened by the whispers that had become a part of their daily lives, decided to investigate the abandoned town. They had heard the stories, but they were young, and the allure of the forbidden was too great. Armed with flashlights and bravado, they ventured into the woods, the handprints guiding their way through the dense underbrush. They laughed and joked, their fear a mere echo of the screams that had once filled the air. But as they approached the town, the laughter died in their throats, replaced by a suffocating silence. The buildings loomed before them, the handprints glowing like malevolent eyes in the darkness. The whispers grew more urgent, a symphony of temptation that spoke directly to their innermost fears and desires. They split up, drawn by the voices that whispered their names, promising them answers to questions they had never dared to ask. One by one, they vanished into the night, the handprints on their skin spreading like a disease. Only their flashlights remained, casting eerie patterns on the ground as they were swallowed by the shadows. In the heart of the town, where Larry's house once stood, they found the tree. Its burnt stump a stark reminder of the man's futile attempt to conquer the forest. But from the ashes, new growth had emerged, twisted and malformed, the whispers stronger than ever. The handprints now covered the entire trunk, pulsing with a sickly light that seemed to reach out and caress their very souls. The teenagers stared in awe, their eyes wide with terror and fascination. They had come seeking answers, but instead they had found a power that could not be controlled, a darkness that had no intention of letting them leave. As the night grew deeper, the whispers grew more urgent, coalescing into a single terrifying voice. It spoke of the end of the world, of the decay that would one day consume all. It promised them a place at its side, a chance to wield the power of the forest. One by one, they dropped their flashlights, the beams fading into the blackness, and reached out to touch the handprints that beckoned them closer. The whispers grew to a crescendo, and the ground trembled as the creature beneath the earth stirred. The town's fate was sealed, as the whispers claimed new souls to add to their chorus, and the cycle of madness and despair continued, unabated, in the heart of the forest that had swallowed Larry's dream of order. The townsfolk, having heard the distant screams, gathered at the edge of the woods, their torches casting flickering shadows on their faces. They knew what had happened, had seen it play out before. The whispers had claimed another group of the curious, the reckless. They whispered among themselves of the ancient pact that had been broken, of the price that must be paid for disturbing the slumber of the malevolent force that dwelled within. The forest had a hunger for souls, and it would not be sated. They watched in horror as the handprints grew over the teenagers, turning them into living, breathing extensions of the decay that surrounded them. The creature emerged, a towering form of twisted branches and decayed leaves, the whispers now a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very heavens. It reached out with a hand that ended in a tangle of thorns and grasped the first of the teenagers, pulling them into its embrace. The others tried to flee, but the forest had other plans. The whispers grew louder in their heads, drowning out their screams as the trees themselves seemed to come alive, reaching out to snatch them back. The creature laughed, a sound that sent chills down the spines of the townsfolk who watched in horror. It was a laugh of triumph, of victory over the insignificant humans who had dared to trespass. The townsfolk retreated, their torches extinguished by the creature's malicious presence. They knew that the whispers would never truly leave them, that the handprints would always be there, a reminder of the horror that lay just beyond their doorsteps. They vowed to keep the story of Larry and the whispers alive, to warn others of the price of curiosity. They built a wall of thorns and deadwood around the town, a barrier to keep the whispers out. But deep in the hearts of the survivors, the whispers remained, a constant echo of the darkness that had claimed so many. And in the deepest part of the forest, the creature watched and waited, its hunger never satiated, always eager for the next soul to hear its siren's call and become one with the eternal decay.